think when I finally felt like I'd started to settle into a groove of like, all right, I've got friends, I've got my places I go, I don't feel like my job is new anymore. That feeling and that ache in my heart of feeling like I wasn't where I wanted to be still existed. And I think that's where I kind of started to dig into this idea of, okay, does God care about this feeling? Like, am I the one who's off here?
Well, friends, here I am with today's culture guest, and often, I think it's a lot of times here on the show, we feature an author who, for some reason, has written a book about something, and sometimes they're like super, have a ton of degrees, and they're all, they're older, and they're really mentory and experty and whatever. And sometimes they're just one of you and one of those people who's kind of walked through some stuff. And a lot of us are like, hey, I'm walking through that too. And so today's guest is kind of in that camp. Her name is Meghan Asbury. She wrote a book titled You Are Not Behind: Building a Life You Love Without Having Everything You Want. Meghan, welcome to the Boundless Show.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, it is super fun and our privilege, of course. So this is funny because I think just reading the title of that book, a lot of our folks here were like, oh my goodness, I'm behind. I better listen in because she's going to tell me exactly what to do with my life and fix everything and the train wreck that is currently my days. So we won't promise that, but hopefully we're going to give some encouragement because you do a good job of talking through your own journey and what you had to learn from God in the process about what you can actually, air quotes, do versus how much of it is resting and waiting and taking that next step. And so I want you to start kind of and a lot of this is pretty recent too, which is fascinating. It's not like, like I referenced oldsters, it's not like you're talking about something 30 years ago that you walked through. You're a young adult. These are kind of all the things. So we're going to be talking a lot about, we mentioned this at Boundless, this idea of people feeling like they have to have markers, kind of these maturity markers, which I'm all for markers of maturity and really going after, like, what does it look like to be growing and to know that I'm making progress and moving the needle in my faith, in my maturity in my life. But at the same time, sometimes we can get a little hung up on those and feel like, oh my goodness, am I doing enough? Where did I miss XYZ train? And so I want you to kind of start with your own story. I know it was in 2018. You opened the book talking about just lying on your bed, staring at another popcorn ceiling and wondering, what am I doing here? So back us up to that. What made you upset and kind of why was that a little bit of a triggering moment for you?
Yeah, I think similar to just what you said, I was in my mid 20s, and I think whether I verbalized them or not, had a lot of expectations of what I thought my life would look like at that point. And it looked a little bit like being married and maybe having started a family, owning a home, not renting a house with another popcorn ceiling. At that point, I was like double digits on the roommates and really didn't know what I wanted to do for my career. And I kind of just started in my heart, whether I was willing to say it out loud or not, silently starting to wonder, did I miss what God had for me? Where did all of these expectations go wrong? And why am I looking around at everyone else my age who seems to have figured out how to get what I want, and I'm still stuck where I am?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. And it's interesting because you say, who seems to have everything that I want, and then everyone else is saying, no, Meghan, you seem to have everything that I want. All we do is finger point and decide that the grass really is greener. So let's talk about, because you actually are a young adult and you probably have a lot of friends, peers in the same spot. What are some of these? I mean, you alluded to some of them just even in your own life, but some of the milestones that young adults feel they need to reach, and where do you feel this assumption is coming from? And then what does the picture actually look like for people in your generation where you are working, just trying to get going and all that kind of stuff? Give us just a clear picture of what some of the frustrations are and some of the milestones that are being missed.
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting that whether you decide to go to college or not, basically up until that point of graduating high school or college, you are doing the same thing as your peers. Like, everyone's going to school, maybe you've got different activities, but you're kind of all moving in this like same general direction of the goal of I'm going to graduate. And then you get to that point, and all of a sudden, everyone who is your same age can be doing something completely different. And I think about, graduating high school, my friends went to college all over the country and all had very different experiences at college, but we were all in college and working towards graduating. But after that, depending on where you live in the country, there are so many different expectations of where you're supposed to be in life by a certain age. So if it's, all right, by 25, I want to be at this particular point in my career, making this amount of money. And somebody else, it could be like, okay, by 27, I want to be married and maybe starting like to try to have my first kid. Or by 30, I want to have like started my own business or I want to be a mom, or just all these little things that I think you could, as a culture, we all are kind of working towards. But it's really in that post grad season where we start to realize we're not moving at the exact same pace or even going in the exact same direction as everyone around us. And that's where we can start to feel that tension and rub of, okay, well, I want to be married. So why is that friend of mine? Why did she meet someone? Why did she get to get married before I did? Or, man, I'm working so hard at work and I don't really feel like I'm like being rewarded for my hard work. Or maybe even looking, one thing that I feel like I still struggle with is I look around, I'm like, man, everyone seems to have figured out like this passion and this job that they love and they really want to do. And I'm kind of like, I have no idea what I want to
Hmm.
do long term. And so I don't know if it's, based on kind of your upbringing, if it's maybe some expectations we somewhere picked along the way from our parents' generation, or it's just the fact that we can see literally what everyone is doing online, that we have started to really fixate on the things we don't have instead of focusing on what we do have.
Yeah, that is so true. And I'm really vibing with you because first of all, I think exactly what you're saying is correct about we now have a window into everyone's lives. And whether or not they're telling the truth is, we don't know. But it does seem like that's the case. And for sure, when you were talking about high school and college, I would add, I say this a lot here at the Boundless Show, that not only are you generally in the same place, but that place is like your days are mostly dictated to you. So you are in school, you know that you're going to wake up, you're going to show up at class, you're going to do some tests, you're going to whatever. And then it's people get out of college and it's a wasteland of like, what choices do I make? And you have multiple choices and you see people moving all over the US and or elsewhere and figuring the things out. And it really can get tricky. And I know, I mean, I was there too. I felt like I kind of entered into my 20s with this, where am I even going with this liberal arts degree that I have? And it's like many choices, but no choices. So I hear you on that. I think that's great. Okay, now you would think that, and you alluded to this, moving around and being in all the places, you would think that maybe a change of location, a change of scenery would help you out. So you moved to Charlotte in North Carolina
Mm-hmm.
in the US, and you thought you kind of hit a groove there. It started out great, but then you kind of got to the same point of desperation. Talk to us about that, and what did you learn from that season in particular?
Yeah, I think, well, one, I moved to Charlotte, North Carolina right before COVID. So it was a very interesting
Oh, sure.
transition in a lot of unmet expectations at the beginning. But I think when I finally felt like I had started to settle into a groove of like, all right, I've got friends, I've got my places I go, I don't feel like my job is new anymore, and I kind of feel more comfortable there. That feeling and that ache in my heart of feeling like I wasn't where I wanted to be still existed. And I think that's where I kind of started to dig into this idea of, okay, does God care about this feeling? Like, am I the one who's off here? What do I do when my desires are not being met? And some of them maybe I could work towards and try to achieve on my own, but some of them felt a little bit like, wow, I really do have to wait on God's timing here. And He's not exactly moving on the 5 year plan that I had for myself. And as I started to dig into that feeling, I realized a lot of it came from one, not willing to be honest about my desires. I think especially as Christians, it's really easy to play this game of acting like we're content because we think if we somehow trick ourselves and God and everyone around us into thinking that we are totally satisfied with where we're at, then maybe we'll finally get the thing that we want. And I don't know if that's something we picked up in youth group in high school or if it's just the comments people love to make of it'll happen when you least expect it. And it's like, okay, I'm not expecting it. Is it happening now? And often it doesn't. And the reality is, God gives us desires, and those desires are not a bad thing. And those desires will always exist, even if we do find a sense of contentment. And I realize that contentment isn't as much of a feeling of satisfaction as it is a choice to like dig into my life and to be okay with where I am while still being really honest about what I wished were different.
Hmm. And I think that's so good. And you actually talk about this in the book. And we don't want to just settle the whole time in how did you feel left behind? How did you feel left behind? But you tell this story of gathering with some friends and they're sharing like so and so got engaged and so got a promotion. And you were just like, I literally don't have anything to share. And that feeling of just almost frantic desperation of, do I need to manufacture something? Where is this going? What am I doing? Talk to us a little bit about, because I like you were kind of starting to go here, the tension between being content and trusting God where you are and realizing that you don't necessarily have to pick an age and have all the things. But what does it look like also to be faithful to do the next thing so that you're not just stalled out and frustrated and wringing your hands right where you are?
I think we often think of waiting as a passive thing, like we are just sitting by waiting for life to happen to us. When I feel like scripture is clear that the Lord gives us like the ability to make choices and he gives us tools to work towards. And waiting is something that we can be doing a lot of things in while we're waiting. And honestly, building the Lord's kingdom while we're waiting is something that I think we just often miss because when we're so focused on, okay, well, I'm not here yet. And so I'm just kind of pout and feel sorry for myself when the reality is like there's so much going on in our lives and the lives of people around us that we can work with the Lord to like we were talking about earlier, like there's this idea of like maturing. But we think of that as like an up and to the right. Like I'm constantly going to be moving up and to the right, where a lot of just life and really the Christian walk is like 3 steps forward, 1 step back, maybe 4 steps forward, 2 steps back. And it's not so linear. It really is a journey and learning to, there are days where I feel like, all right, I have mastered feeling content today. And I feel really grateful for where I'm at. And I trust the Lord is working all things together for my good, like the Bible says. And quite literally hours later, I am like in despair and questioning the Lord's kindness in my life because of insert whatever happened. And I think the reality is like that is part of life and we are going to feel that way and that's normal. And God is not angry with us or disappointed in us when we wrestle. There's so many stories in scripture of people wrestling it out with God, but it's in that wrestling that we actually get to know him for who he is and start to see our lives the way that he sees it.
Mm-hmm. So true. Give young adults who are listening, Megan, because I think it's so helpful coming from you, someone who's been there, is there. What does movement look like beyond? So for example, that person that's like, okay, well, I don't know where I'm going to be in a year, but all I know is what I have today. And I'm hoping that by the end of this week, blah, blah, blah. So if it is not a new job, it's not a new relationship, it's not all these big things that you can hang your, hat on. What are little things, little areas of growth, little ways to move the needle that people can be doing even this week?
This is really good and something that I still so badly have to remind myself and discipline myself to do because I do think similar to what we were talking about of this, you're kind of building up to this point of becoming an adult. Like everything in life feels like it's moving towards this one spot. And then when you get there, you're kind of looking for that next marker when the reality is most of our life is spent in the minutes that are really mundane and really normal. And I even look at the life of Jesus and a lot, we read all these stories of scripture of him like performing these miracles and speaking to these big crowds. But what does he do right after that? He sleeps, he eats, he spends time with his father. There's so much not recorded in those, books of the Bible that were just normal everyday living. And that is where we spend most of our lives. Even, planning a wedding maybe takes a year max. Like a wedding day is a few hours. I just got married a little over a year ago, and there's so much build up and plan and prep and things to do, and the day is over in 5 hours, and you're like, wait, all of that, it was such a fun day, but it was just so short. And I think we have to start looking at our lives as the minutes make up everything else, not these big moments. And so the small things we choose to spend our time with actually do matter. And the decisions that we're making on a daily basis do make up our lives. And I think it's similar to exercise where, you go to the gym and you don't really want to go to the gym, but you're like, I know I need to move my body and this is going to feel good. And the first few times you go, it is just painful and uncomfortable and you're not having any fun. But then the discipline to keep going and going and going, one day you're waking up, you're like, oh, I can't wait to go to the gym today. And
Mm-hmm.
then you'll feel that way for a few months and then something will happen and you'll start to get in that rut again. And then it's time to try something new. I think the same is with our relationships. I think it's like we can make those small daily decisions and disciplines in our relationships, choosing to initiate by sending the text, inviting people to do something, not waiting around for someone to ask you to hang out. It's taking those small steps in your time with the Lord. It's that waking up in the morning and getting in the Word. And most days I read the Word, I'm not like, oh, I feel like I have gotten like all these great revelations that I can take into my day and I know exactly how to apply it. But over a decade, I'm in my 30s now of like that daily discipline of trying to get in the Word. It's like those things that I read 5 years ago that I'm clinging to now in like the hard things that my husband and I are walking through just with our health. And I didn't think that like daily practice of getting in the Word was going to actually carry me when I needed it most. And there are so many little things we can do, whether it's in our job or in our families, or, if you're married, in your marriages, that seem like not that big of a deal. But those are the things that are building you to become the person that you are becoming.
Mm-hmm. Which so flies in the face of what we assume to be the solutions to so many things. And they tend to be these big capstone things. One thing I want you to speak to, because you talked about getting married a year ago, is it seems like so many young adults, especially Christian young adults, are waiting for marriage in a way that like this relationship, this marriage, whatever, is going to solve such a huge number of problems. So it's certainly going to solve my financial problems because I'm hoping I'm going to marry someone who can take on all my debt and just be, I don't know, they're waiting for some elusive billionaire or something. Or it's going to solve my emotional needs, or it's going to give me a purpose, or it's going to give me, like you said, a calling, because hopefully they're going to have a calling and I can just join it. And so we're waiting, waiting, waiting. And I think a lot of married people that I talk to say, nope, now I'm married and I either have the same problems or now I have new problems or there's new challenges. What had to pivot for you in thinking through that of maybe, your girlhood dreams of like, oh, marriage, this is where I'm supposed to be. This is something I'm supposed to add. And what's the real picture behind that?
Yeah, I mean, to what you say, I tell people all the time, marriage did solve some of my problems and then it created 500 new ones. And I love my husband and I think marriage is awesome and it was absolutely worth the wait. But to think that if I had gotten married in my mid 20s when I really wanted to, how much of my hope and identity and worth would have hung on that relationship, that would have been really, really hard. And even like, my husband and I were like, long story short, we were friends for 6 years before we got married. And not once in that 6 years had I ever thought like, oh, he's the guy I want to marry. He just was a friend. And so I even think like the expectations that we put on this person that we don't even know yet to be all of these things. And I think it's good to hope and to dream and to ask the Lord and to, not settle. But I think we like put so much weight on the wrong things when it comes to who we think we want to marry and what we think marriage is going to look like. When back to what I just said, a lot of marriage is like we like go to work and then we go work out and then we make dinner and then we have like our things that are like part of our routine. And so much of it is like just this like everyday living. And yes, like it is so beautiful to have a partner in life to like make decisions with. And like I said, it solved a lot of the things that I was like hoping for in my singleness. But at the same time, like now it's like there are all these like new things where like I feel lonely in a different way when I'm married. Like I still need friends, I like moved to the city after we got married and it's been like an adjustment to make new friends in my 30s and a lot of our friends are starting to have kids and I also just think the line of feeling behind like always moves. Like
Mm-hmm.
I've only been married for a year and I felt behind a million times over in the last year for different reasons than I did when I was single. And I think to acknowledge that reality that the line is always going to move because we are such forgetful people, the Bible tells us a lot to remember. And I think a lot about the Israelites in Exodus, like they finally get out of Egypt and they're like already like discontent because they want something else to be different. And the same is true in our life circumstance. Once you finally get the thing you want, it's not going to fix that thing in your heart that you're hoping it will solve.
Yeah, it's so wild. I'm reading through the Bible this year, and I just this morning read a part. I mean, and I've been through I feel like I've read about 3 years worth of the Israelites already, just in the first 4 books of the Bible. But this morning it was again, God saying, doing a massive deliverance, allowing them to fight their enemies as they were crossing through the wilderness and defeat them. And he said they would. And so they have a defeat under their belts. And then they're like, well, anyway, but we don't have pomegranates and onions and leeks. And so we're mad about that. It's like he just delivered a victory to you. And now you're already on to the next thing. And we're so like that. So, well, I want folks to be aware of the book. Again, we've been talking about You Are Not Behind. I've been talking with Meghan Asbury. The other thing in the book that we didn't get into here, but she talks about, and so you're going to want to get a copy of this, is the idea of living with your disappointment and your grief. And I think that's so helpful. I talk about this a lot here on the show of how it is okay to grieve where you are. For a lot of you, that might be singleness. And you might say, now I'm in my 30s and I'm still single. And you might have to grieve the fact that you did not get married in your 20s. That is a reality. And that is something to grieve. And the Psalms encourage us to do that and to pour out our complaint. So let's be okay with that. And so, Meghan, I think you do a great job of walking folks into that as well in this book. And so, Meghan, thank you so much for writing this and for walking it out and being part of this conversation.
Yeah, it was great to be here.